You want to get started, Jean?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. For those of you in Zoom land, you are missing out on Panera coffee and bagels and parfaits. So just heads up for next time. If you're here in person, you get yummy breakfast too. So welcome everybody to our first coffee talk in a while that we are doing in person and via Zoom. Our sponsor today is Greg Surrey with National Property Inspections. Greg, do you want to come up and introduce yourself and tell everyone what you and your company are all about?
Sure. Thank you. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Greg Surrey with National Property Inspections. So basically, National Property Inspections is a franchise. We have over 300 franchisees in the US and Canada. And I do light commercial, pre-listing inspections, buyer inspections, feasibility, insurance inspections like core point, wind mitigations, builder's warranty inspections. I pretty much handle everything from South Hillsborough County all the way down to Sarasota County, pretty much as south as Northport. And what kind of separates National Property Inspections, one of the things that separates us from our competition is for every inspection, we offer 6-month free limited warranty. So basically what that means is if I inspect anything mechanical or appliance related in the home and it's okay, and the minute I leave, the water heater goes out, the refrigerator goes out, we will help repair or replace it up to $2,500 up to 6 months, and it's free to your clients. And also on my free time, I do volunteer with Bay Area Greyhound adoption. So if you see a lot of Greyhounds mingling, I'm usually there. You stop over, please stop over and say hi. And if you guys, the realtors out there, if you have your own inspector and they're good, that's great. But if you are in a pinch and you want to try someone new, I would appreciate giving me a try. And thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well, so without further ado, what everybody is here for, Natasha from Berlin, Patten, Ebling with our presentation on how to not get sued. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here in person and on Zoom. So today I am going to be talking to you about transactional safety. And transactional safety means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. The first thing that probably comes to mind is your actual physical safety. A lot of times as realtors, inspectors, you guys have to go out and see properties, meet people you've never met before, that you know nothing about. And so when I say safety, I know that a lot of people think about that. What it is that you need to do in order to make sure that you're keeping yourself safe, making sure that you're keeping your clients safe. When you put someone in your car, or pre-COVID, or now when you tell someone to meet you somewhere, are you taking them to somewhere that is a safe and secure location? Do you know whose house you're pulling up to? Is there a reason to be concerned? So I know that those are things that people think about, but a lot of other factors factor into what I consider transactional safety. Everything that goes into drafting your contract to make sure that when your buyer or seller enters into this legally binding document, they're protected. And more than them being protected, they understand what protections they have or what they might be giving up. I know that we're in a market right now where everyone's trying to work as fast as they can, because if you take more than a couple minutes to write an offer, the house might be gone. If you take more than a couple minutes to put in that showing request, the house might be under contract. And so we're seeing a lot of people working really quickly. And one of the concerns that I have when people do that is you're not necessarily giving your buyers, who might not be as familiar as you and I with the contract, and the opportunity to really understand what they're signing. And I see this a lot when it's too late. And so today I really want to talk about the things that you should be thinking about when you're working with buyers and sellers, and the things that you should be doing to protect yourself and your client. Because while the topic is we don't want you to get sued, we also don't want your client to get sued. We also know that our businesses all depend on people having great experiences with us and wanting to tell their friends to use us again, or wanting to tell, family members how great things were so that they can recommend us to other people. And that's kind of what we all, want at the end of a transaction. We want to close successfully, and we also want people to have that positive impression at the end of it. You don't want that pit in your stomach when something closes or when your phone rings where you're like, if this person calls me, I know that something terrible has happened. And that's what we're here to avoid. So when you're thinking about your contracts, it's really, really important to make sure that even in this market, you're taking the time to fully explain to your clients what they're signing, especially right now when you have buyers who are seeing a home and wanting to put an offer in immediately. So prior to getting a contract executed, it's really important for your client's protection and for your protection that things are fully explained to them. You don't want the phone call after closing has happened or the day before closing that says, hey, I'm looking at the settlement statement. Why are all the title charges on my side? I didn't realize I was paying those. And that's not a fun conversation to have, because usually they'll call their closing agent, whoever that might be, and the closing agent's going to say, oh, well, when you look at section 9 of the contract on page 4 or 5, depending on how it printed, this is the box that was checked, and therefore you're responsible for paying these fees. And then their automatic next reaction is, well, no one told me that. And then we explain to them that they signed this contract. And the downside is it's always someone else's fault. The client's never going to say, oh, well, I signed it electronically and I didn't read anything. I just clicked through the boxes because I wanted to get my offer in. It's, well, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't my realtor tell me? Why didn't the seller tell me? It's always someone else's fault. So a really important thing there is to really make sure that you're spending the time to educate your clients. The big things are related to closing costs, because those always take people by surprise, especially if you're selling a home for the first time after your seller bought it new construction, because they remember their closing costs and how they paid all the title fees and the doc stamps, and they want their buyers to do the same, and that's not necessarily what happens. So that's another area of conflict. So really the big thing there is making sure people are fully informed about what they're signing, because I don't want the phone call, I know you don't want the phone call from someone either right before or after closing where they say, well, that's not what I agreed to, or no one explained it. Don't you think it was your job to tell me that? And it is. We want to make sure people know what they're signing, but we're also working in this very competitive market where people are clicking through things because they don't want to miss a deadline. And so it really puts that extra burden on all of us to make sure that people know exactly what they're signing, especially with regard to any contingencies that they're waiving or any contingencies that they're adding. I can't tell you the number of times that people think that their purchase is going to be contingent on their home selling, or they forget to tell someone that they can only afford to buy this home if their other home sells. And so they get really close to closing, and all of a sudden they don't have the money to pay for it because, oh, well, that closing doesn't happen until next week. And so it's all of these things that a person who's doing this for the first time, either first time ever, first time in 5 years, or first time in 10 years, might not be thinking about. And then they rely on what they consider to be the professionals that they've hired to do this for them. And we really need to make sure that you're not ending that situation with someone going, oh, well, they never explained it. I had to spend $5,000 or $10,000 more because they didn't tell me that I was paying that. And those are the things that lead people to make phone calls to our offices, and I'm sure other people's offices that say, well, my realtor didn't tell me, so I think that I want to sue them. Shouldn't they have to pay for it? And I always tell them, no, they signed a contract, they're responsible for what they signed, but that doesn't necessarily prevent them from having those negative feelings that we want to avoid. And unfortunately, if you get someone who is particularly litigious, they might still file a lawsuit, even if they know that they have no merit to it. So just making sure that people really understand and are truly getting what they want out of their contract is important. One other thing that I'm going to address just in that vein is appraisals. We're seeing a lot of buyers. I feel like almost every contract I see has some type of appraisal waiver language in it. And 50% of the time, maybe more, the appraisals are coming in low, and then buyers are upset because even though they waived that and it seemed like a good idea to get the property under contract, they thought that they would get another shot at renegotiating that. So they never thought that they were actually going to have to follow through with making up the difference. And so that's another area where I'm seeing a lot of phone calls from people who are upset at their realtors and upset at their closing agent, because even though we don't really have any control over what number comes back on the appraisal, they think that, you know, someone should have really explained that it's possible for the appraisal to come back $40,000 low or $50,000 low, because a lot of people, and quite honestly, if you asked me this a year ago, most of the appraisals that I saw were either at value or a couple $1,000s under. We rarely saw significant gaps. So when someone said, oh, should I make up the difference? Most people could confidently say, yeah, sure, it'll be a couple $1,000s, because it really was most of the time a small gap. But right now we're seeing really significant gaps. And buyers are not necessarily understanding that. And so they're going, yeah, we'll waive that, no big deal. We can totally make up the difference. And then they realize that the difference is 30 grand, not 3,000. Or I had a situation where the difference was $120,000. And so, you know, you have a buyer who's really motivated and they're willing to put whatever number they need to on that line to get that contract. And I know that our goal as real estate professionals is to get the deal closed for our customers and to do it as the best that we can. The downside is sometimes they're really motivated and it's easy to move past that and say, this is what they really want. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to be the bad guy and protect ourselves by giving them this information and saying it the way that might not be the best sales pitch, but making sure that they understand, because again, you don't want, and I had this phone call yesterday, a buyer who had language in a contract, the appraisal came in low. When I called to explain that they do, because of the language that they put in the contract, have to do this, the response was, well, how would I have known that it would be $38,000 short? And the answer is we don't know. We don't know until it's too late. So if that's a contingency that you're going to put in there and basically give up your ability to get out of the contract, you really need to understand that. And that, I think, is one of the biggest problems right now, appraisals. But all of that to say, as a real estate professional, I think that the best way that you can protect yourself from these type of issues is to make sure that you're finding the right people to answer those questions. You don't necessarily have to take on all of that liability on your own. You don't have to be everyone's attorney and inspector and lender all in one. You just need to make sure that we're curating the right people to actually help get your client where they need to be, and the right people to give them that advice and take some of that liability off of your plate. You don't want to be in a position where your client thinks that you provided them with legal advice that, as I'm sure you all know from your ethics classes, you're not allowed to provide. You want to make sure they talk to an attorney to get their legal advice. I do it all the time. When people ask me for tax advice, I let them know that I am not a tax professional. They need to talk to an accountant or a CPA, because you don't want the phone call a couple of weeks from now when they go, well, Natasha said so-and-so about taxes. And it's like, well, she's not a qualified tax professional. You should have never taken her advice, but that might be too late. They might have already taken what they thought was great advice. But, you know, I always recommend people talk to the right people. Like when people call me about inspections, for example, and ask me how to fix something on an inspection report, I am the first to admit that I have no idea how a lot of the things in people's homes work. The inspector that went out and made a note is probably going to be your best resource there. And while ultimately we want to do what the customer wants, the best way to protect yourself is making sure that they're connecting with the people who are qualified to answer their questions and provide them with the best information. And ultimately, they're going to make whatever decision they want. My people who had a very low appraisal still closed. They made up the difference. That's the home that they wanted. But you want to make sure people have all the information before they make that choice, because other than the fact that you'll sleep better at night knowing that there's not a looming phone call, it really will make your clients appreciate that you've explained to them all of the risks and given them their options. And it'll protect you from that inevitable email, 6 weeks or 6 months later, where it's like, hey, we have such and such problem. And you can refer back and say, hey, remember when we talked about it, when we got the inspection, or remember when we talked about it, when the appraisal came in and we went back and forth and we told you that these were the options and this is what you decided to do. And then hopefully that'll be that light bulb moment where they're like, oh yeah, you did. And I chose to do this. don't get me wrong, there might still be someone who thinks everything's everybody else's fault, and unfortunately, there's nothing we can do about that. But really making sure that you're connecting people with the right people and making sure they're getting good quality information throughout your transaction is really what's going to protect you. The other thing that I think is really important in transactions, especially now when we're moving so quickly. I know that we are all super reliant on our cell phones. You can do pretty much everything on your phone. Right now, when people aren't doing as many things in person, people are working from their phones. They're handling personal things on their phones. You're banking, you're on social media. Everything is in that one little device. And one of the big parts of your real estate transaction is you're going to make a deposit. You're either going to get financing or you're going to wire money for your cash to close if you're doing that, or for all of your proceeds if you're paying cash. And wire transfers are another important part about transactional safety. I often get emails from realtors asking for me to provide them with wiring instructions so they can give them to their clients. Our firm policy is not to do that unless there's absolutely no choice, because that's adding one more link where something can get intercepted or something can get diverted, or one more place where there's just, the longer the chain is between the source and the final destination, there's more opportunities for things to go wrong. So make sure no matter who you're working with, whether it's a law firm or a title company, that your buyers are receiving wire instructions securely. I can't tell you the number of times, because people are in a hurry, I will see someone just forward them out unsecured. It's like, here you go. Someone will ask for them, or they'll say, I'm having trouble opening the secure link. Can you just send them over? And someone trying to be very helpful will just shoot them over. And all of a sudden they're out in space. And maybe 90% of the time nothing happens, but there's still that risk. And that's a risk that you don't want on your client. You don't want someone who's already stressed out about a real estate transaction, maybe making their first wire transfer ever, who doesn't really know how this process works, suddenly getting something and following it because they're like, oh yeah, well, the last time I got wiring instructions, someone just shot them over to me. So this is not unusual. And you're kind of taking away that protection and that level of security from your buyers, because everyone's in a hurry. And I totally get it. I have people who call and they're like, Natasha, I have to click too many boxes and enter too much information to get your wiring instructions. Can't you just send them to me in a regular email? And I could, but the concern is, well, once I release them to you, what happens between me and you? Because if you're emailing me from your Gmail account or your Hotmail account, some people still use AOL as well, or your AOL account, there's a chance that someone could intercept that. And unfortunately, we're living in a world where people are really sophisticated about how they do that, with spoofing emails, with hacking emails and things like that. So another big part of making sure your people have a smooth and safe transaction is making sure that we're giving them information securely. And so much information is transmitted when we're working on a transaction. There's so much information in a contract that we all expect to see. But when you think about it, it's very specific information. And if that went to someone who was trying to do something nefarious, that's a lot of information. It has their purchase price, it has their deposit amount, it tells them who their realtors are, it tells you the buyer and seller's name, it has property addresses. It might have an address on it if you filled in the little section on page 12 about like notice addresses. So all of a sudden, someone who got a copy of the contract that was sent unsecured now has all of this information, which on its own they can't do anything with. But if they suddenly feel like, oh, well, you know, this buyer's not really paying attention, they're just clicking on everything or responding to everything, you put yourself in a situation where you have someone who's like, I have all this information, let me see what I can get. And
I always advise my buyers to, even when they receive them securely, to call and confirm that that is the correct information that they receive.
And that, I think, is the most important part. And all of our emails, I know our firm does, and most law firms that I've worked with in the area have language in their emails where they say, we are sending you wiring instructions securely. Please call our office to confirm them before you initiate the wire so we can verify that you have the right information. And I cannot tell you the number of phone calls I get that are, hey, Natasha, I'm leaving the bank. I've initiated the wire. I'm just calling you because your email told me to. I'm like, no, but if you read it, it was before you initiate the wire. It doesn't really do anyone any good if you call me after you've initiated the wire. It's still better than not calling at all, because if there's a problem, we can go back into the bank and, you know, see if we can get something stopped or work that out. And the sooner you catch wire fraud, the better. But I get that it's an extra step, but you don't want to be the person who recommended a closing agent and then your buyer clicked on something and it's really nobody's fault except the person who clicked on this random email they got that looked legitimate. And maybe it's not even their fault. Maybe, you know, it was a really good email and all of a sudden they're really upset at everyone because they've lost their $5,000 deposit or their $500,000 cash to close. And do we really want to, at that point, it's not worth having a conversation with someone about how it happened. No one wants to lecture then, but how do you make sure that someone feels comfortable doing this again with you because now they feel like the whole system has failed them. So it is a little extra work to make sure that people are protected. It's a little extra work to make sure that you're protected, but it's worth it. And in the long run, your clients really will appreciate it, even though it seems like you're making them jump through a couple hoops. And when you communicate those things to your closing agent, whoever that might be, they can help you jump through those hoops. Your lending partners can help you jump through those hoops and make sure everyone's on the same page. So they're getting consistent information. So they know that, you know, one person's not just being difficult and trying to make their lives harder. It's we're all working together to make sure that your transaction is safe and secure. That's why the deadlines in the contract are important. That's why it's important that, you know, we have an initial conversation about anything unusual in the contract, if something didn't get signed right, or if there was an addendum that was missed. So all of that is stuff during the transaction that you really want to be cognizant of. And a lot of stuff just kind of seems so simple and like things that you probably do every day, but it's always the one time that you miss it that something goes wrong. It's always the one time, and it only takes one time, and you don't want that feeling where you're like, did I do my best? Did I fail my client in some way because I didn't explain it? I'll be the first to admit there have been transactions where I've gone through and like reread every email because sometimes I'm like, how did we get here? I thought we were all on the same page. And then you go back and like, I really don't know. And a lot of it is just the speed at which transactions are happening, especially in Florida, where we have people who are moving from different states and they don't necessarily understand how Florida is different than wherever they're coming from, whether it's California or New York. There's just a lot of differences, and a lot of times people assume it will be the same. And so the best way to make sure that you're protecting your transaction is really to communicate with everyone, have the right set of professionals to help you. One slightly funny example of just a miscommunication is I had an out-of-state buyer who was moving from an escrow state where they close an escrow and then the seller stays in the property for a little while and then moves out after. They did not realize that that's not how Florida worked. So when the buyer went to do their walkthrough on the closing date, they were not moved out. They didn't have movers scheduled. They were not packed because they thought that that's how they closed. And there was a very obviously a miscommunication. And I know that the realtor had, you know, told them how closing works, but you have people who they had bought and sold so much real estate in their home state that I think that it just kind of like didn't stick. So you have people who are very best intentions. It's not like the seller was trying to delay closing or was just, you know, ignoring deadlines, which sometimes happens. But this was a situation where it just didn't stick. And that was a situation where suddenly everyone was blaming the seller's realtor. And I don't know that it was necessarily their fault because the contract tells you that you have to be moved out. There've been multiple conversations and sometimes, you know, it just doesn't stick. And then you have a seller who is like, well, you never told me I had to do that. And now I'm going to be in default and it's all your fault. And you don't want to be in that situation because, again, I know that our goal is to keep our clients happy. And sometimes the downside of that is you get beat up on a little bit because everything is your fault. And you're not really going to be able to say, no, this is your fault. I told you 7 times and you just didn't listen. Despite how much sometimes you want to say, no, but I told you that, or I told you so. And making sure that you have documentation, making sure that you're allowing them to get all the information they need from all the right places really helps protect you because then you don't have that, no one ever told me that, or, oh, well, that's not how it was explained to me, which is what we hear a lot. So I think that I'm probably right about done, but I want to check to see if anyone had any questions.
Someone had a question in the chat about sight unseen.
That is a really good question. Oh, there's a chat. Yeah, so that's a really good question. We see a lot of people, especially right now, in our crazy market where people just put an offer on it. I always tell people if you have a buyer who's buying something sight unseen, recommend that they do inspections, recommend that they speak with their inspector because they're going to be relying on you. And I feel the same way about buyers who are not local, who have their realtors do their walkthroughs for them. When you're doing a walkthrough virtually, they see what you see, but you're not necessarily looking for the same things that they're looking for. For example, I had a transaction where a buyer did a walkthrough and there had been a stain on the wall forever. It was in the pictures, like it had been there, and they didn't notice it until the walkthrough, and then that became a significant issue because they're like, obviously there's a leak, and it's like, no, that's just like a stain that's been there. And so when you're taking on that responsibility of doing the walkthrough, or you're taking on the responsibility of guiding a buyer through a house, you want to make sure that you're giving them, again, all of the right people. Have them reach out to an inspector who could do the inspection and then explain all of the issues to them because they're not able to see and feel. And then you definitely want to follow up with some type of email that clarifies that you've provided them with all of this information and that they're choosing to move forward and knowing that they haven't had that opportunity to see and feel. If at all possible, I would try to get them in person for a walkthrough. So at least they have one last chance because once the deal is closed, there's really nothing you can do. And we've had that happen. We've had buyers who bought sight unseen. They've come to see the property a couple of weeks after closing and they're like, oh, I hate this. I can't live here. And there's really nothing they can do but relist the house at that point, which may or may not be a good thing in this market. Maybe they'll get their money back. But you really want to make sure that you're disclosing to them that you FaceTiming them from the home or them reading an inspection report is not the same as them walking through the house and getting like the touch and feel of the house, and make sure that they understand that. And then if you work with a real estate attorney, they're probably going to be able to draft something for your buyers to sign that confirms, or your brokerage might already have something in place where they can sign saying that they haven't seen the house and they're relying on, you know, an inspection and they're relying on a video conference. And a lot of it is gauging your client. You might know someone really well and say, you know, I don't want to scare them away by having them sign 7 disclosures, but you might be working with someone that you've never met and you might want them to sign a couple of disclosures because you want to make sure you're protected and you're not going to be in that situation where they see the house and then it's, well, why didn't you FaceTime me that corner of the kitchen? I would have noticed that this tile was cracked and I would have never bought the house. Or, oh, this paint is not the same color that I thought it was. I've had people fight about paint colors. It's all kinds of things. Real estate's a little crazy always, and especially now. So when you have buyers who are willing to just put an offer in, try to make sure that you get something from them in writing, confirming that they understand what they're doing, for lack of a better word, and that they understand the risks associated with that. So that way we can make sure that they're comfortable moving forward and that you're protected.
I don't see any other Zoom questions, but if anyone has
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm a one-man show brokerage, so I don't have access to what Keller Williams or Coldwell Banker documents put out, but my background is in construction. So every builder had a really nice templated steps along the way checklist for the buyers. That would be great if anyone here or online could share if there's some type of nice template out there that's accessible. One could use, you know, just to cover those hot spots, you know, didn't say I told you so, or, you know, here was our summary checklist. So I just wanted to throw that out.
Yeah, I know that I don't have one, but if someone does, I'm sure that they would be happy to share. And if you have any questions, I'm always happy, and I tell people this all the time, if there's something specific you need, someone can draft it. There's always a way to make it materialize. So that's something that can always be worked on. And the really nice thing is, and while I do not recommend anyone practice law off of Google, if you Google a form, it gives you so many options to kind of jumpstart what you need, because there are issues that you might not have thought of. For example, I was recently working with someone and had to look up a license agreement in California. And while I was looking at that document, they had all of this other information about how they do certain inspections in California. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. If I ever have this specific issue, I might pull that form back up and kind of use it as a starting point. So I think that that's important. I know I try to tell people, and one of the things that I really like is when at the start of the transaction, we can all get a list of dates. So we all have the same deadlines, because I've run into issues where, again, because everyone is working so fast and because we're so heavy on the use of technology, we assume that the technology is capturing the important things for us. But if you have something that's completely electronically signed and you forget to click the box that populates a date, no one really knows when that document got signed. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're fighting over what the effective date was, because no one really knows when it was signed. Because sometimes people will sign things electronically and then deliver it by hand. And so it's like you kind of lose that timestamp of when delivery happened. So that's one thing that I like. And if I ever see an ambiguity in a contract where we're not sure what that effective date is, it's always nice to send an email and say, hey, we're seeing that such and such date is the effective date. Does everybody agree? If no one responds, I'm going to assume that this is the date that we're in agreement about. And that, again, protects your client, because there's nothing worse than you telling your buyer, yeah, you have until Friday to get out of the contract. And then on Friday, you send out your release and cancellation on an as-is contract, and the seller's like, oh, too bad. You had until Thursday and you didn't, so I get to keep your deposit. And then that's going to be our fault, which maybe we're right and maybe we're not, but that's still a fight that no one really wants to have, which in retrospect would have been avoided had we sent an email and confirmed that everyone had the same effective date. So I think just making sure that we're keeping that timeline is also really important, because it's so easy with the number of moving parts that a buyer has for something to get missed, or for them to forget a deadline, or not really understand the gravity of a deadline. I've had people who are like, oh, but we told them that we're probably going to cancel, so we're good. No, that's not the same as telling someone you are canceling. You saying, I think that I'm going to cancel if such and such doesn't happen, is not the same as something in writing that says, if I do not get XYZ, then I'm exercising my right to cancel. And because a lot of real estate is so informal, because we all work together and we're relying on people being good and kind, which is great, and I think makes our lives so much better. The downside is sometimes things don't get documented the way that they should. And then you have that uncomfortable situation where you're like, oh, well, you really didn't cancel. Did you put anything in writing? And it's like, oh no, but I know such and such, and we've worked together so many times and never had this problem. And it's not usually the other realtor or the closing agent. It's if you have a seller that's having a really bad day and they want that deposit, no amount of, I know, we talked about it, is going to work. They're going to stick to their guns. And so it's really, I hate to say it, but it really is making sure that people are getting those right connections to get the right advice, but also making sure you're documenting things so that if it ever comes back to you, or you ever need to show someone how we got to this point, you have those emails or those letters, or I say letters, I know no one sends any letters anymore, but you have those emails or those communications, something in writing that we can refer back to, because sometimes that's all it takes. I know that I've had people argue and kick and scream about things, and then when you produce the email that everyone had agreed to, it's like, oh, okay, you're right, never mind. And I hate to say it, but that's one of the things that we need, is to make sure that you guys are protected, because we're documenting things. And as much as we want to trust each other to all do the right thing, sometimes it's really out of our control, and that's the hard part.
I think too, when looking at the dates, because I know I reached out to you about a few different things, especially in February with different holidays, and January and February with Martin Luther King and President's Day, with, you know, effective dates or commitment dates or different dates falling on those holidays or a Saturday. A lot of agents go back and forth with each other, like, no, it's the day before, or no, it's the day after. So understanding, you know, and actually looking at a calendar and saying, oh, wait, this date is actually a holiday or a weekend. So what date is it really that we have until?
And more than, in addition to what date is it really, it's what date do the people want? Because we do get a lot of contract close dates that are Saturdays. And did we accidentally look at the wrong month or year and pick a Saturday when we really meant the Friday because someone has to move in over the weekend? Or are we good to go until Monday? And that's another point of contention sometimes, because if you have a seller who thought that they had the weekend and they were going to move out on Sunday and transfer possession on Monday, but you have a buyer who thought it was Friday and has movers, you don't want to be in that position where you have that one person who's not understanding of the fact that this was a simple error. Mistakes happen. We're all human. You have the person who's like, well, my whole life depends on me getting into that house at 9 a.m. on Friday and you've ruined everything. I'm going to sue you to pay for the movers and the storage and the whatever else they can come up with. You have to pay for my hotel and dinner, and I would like a Visa gift card because my bags are all packed and I need to buy new clothes. I don't know. Whatever that situation might be, I've gotten some interesting phone calls. But you want to make sure that everyone's on the same page as early in the transaction as possible. And unfortunately, because deadlines that fall on Saturday, Sunday, or a holiday automatically go to the next business day at 5 o'clock, that's what a lot of people work on. But you have a lot of people who are like, oh no, it has to be the day before because obviously we wanted the weekend. The problem is what's obvious to one person is not always obvious to someone else. And it really depends on perspective. You have a seller who wants the weekend to move out. You have a buyer who wants the weekend to move in. So what do you do? And a lot of it is just getting ahead of that and making sure you're communicating and truly making sure that your clients understand what they sign. The biggest thing, again, just to, I guess, reiterate, is making sure they know what closing costs they're responsible for, because that always catches people off guard. Making sure they understand their contingencies in the contract and their deadlines, and making sure that they're getting advice from people who are qualified to give them the really good advice, because that makes you look really great. That makes them feel really good in the transaction and hopefully gets us to a smooth and easy closing, which is what ultimately we all want.
To answer your question, Florida Realtors, the state association, they have a legal hotline. So if you call them, they might have some kind of documents that you're looking for or advice that can help you out. And that's free for you as a member. So
Yeah, I never even thought to use them for that. Choose the situation.
they might direct you to something.
Our text, do you keep copy of the text? Those are also counted as having something in writing.
So that is a gray area, which is really fun because we communicate so much by text, and technically it's a written communication. So you could argue yes. And I haven't checked the case law on that in a while, but it last time I checked, it was a gray area where some people will say, yes, it's a written communication if taken in the right context. But I still always recommend people send an email. And the reason I do the email is because then you can copy all of the respective people that need to be in the transaction. So everyone has a copy and it's not just a text message. And then you have someone who's like, oh, well, I never received the text message, or well, I changed my phone number, or whatever that could be, because you're going to be using the email that all the other communications went to. So I like email. Think text might be a gray area, but it doesn't hurt to have it. I've had text messages attached to emails to say, hey, I know we talked about this, but just confirming, so everybody's on the same page. And I tell people all the time, feel free to use me in that situation and say, well, I wanted Natasha to see it as well, so she has it for a file. That's why I'm like reiterating our conversation so everyone's on the same page. We're all part of the same team, and so whatever we can do to support each other to make sure at the end of the day that our customers are happy, but we're not putting ourselves in a bad position to get to that goal, because ultimately we want to be able to work with each other and our customers, hopefully many, many more times. Any other questions? So I'm looking down at the chat to see if anything pops up.
I haven't seen anything. But if you're on Zoom and you have a question, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to. We will hear you.
We will. Well, thank you guys for coming. I don't know if Gina has anything else to add, but.
No, I don't. That's great, Natasha.
Thank you.
No, I'll go to, I'll message tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good. All right. I'll send you the list. Well, I guess we'll say goodbye and wave people so they don't see a blank wall.
Thank you all for joining on Zoom. We hope to see you in person next time if that's something you're comfortable with, but obviously this is still an option for those of you, and this is recorded and we will be sharing the recording, and thanks for coming. Putt-putt. Oh yes, if you're still on, we have a putt-putt miniature golf tournament coming up on April 22nd. If you're interested, it's an outdoor mini golf, socially distanced type tournament. Get a foursome together. You can sign up as an individual or you can sign up as a non-putter, and all the proceeds go toward the Everyday Blessings Springboard program, which supports foster care children aging out of the system. So go check that out, and we'll see you guys next time. Everyone saying thank you.